All right, what's good, y'all? Welcome to Culture Shift with Raven50mm, where we are reimagining podcasting by leveraging blockchain and Web3 tools to experiment with monetization and distribution methods. Brought to you by the Legacy Portrait Project and the 50mm Collective. The 50mm Collective is a community of BIPOC, trans, and queer digital artists and allies that work together as we pioneer Web3 and NFTs. The 50mm Collective has a YouTube channel with tutorials and helpful info on how to get set up and get started with archiving your artwork on the blockchain. The Legacy Portrait Project is a mission-driven endeavor aimed at empowering BIPOC, trans, and queer individuals. Legacy portraits are still photographs that come to life with video narration, sharing the subject's story from their perspective, powered by AR technology. I'm super excited to announce that the Legacy Portrait Tour, that's right, this project is touring around the country, bringing these innovative portrait sessions city to city, with the first stop being in Austin, Texas during South by Southwest. The tour will be connecting with folks at two major events. Number one, the brand new summit hosted by Boys Club. Shout out to the wonderful ladies of Boys Club. And number two, Rest Fest, a wellness and healing festival hosted by Mutual Love. Shout out to the good fellas of Mutual Love. Next stop of the Legacy Portrait Tour will be in New York during NFT NYC. We'll be putting together a creator house and meetup for our community. We are currently reaching out to value-aligned brands and companies to be part of this initiative. I'm so freaking excited, y'all. It's going to be a good time. If you're thinking to yourself, what, AR, video narration, what? Go check out the demo at legacyportraitproject.com. Get on the list. Let's get it. This project is innovation at its finest. All right, let's get into this conversation. We have, like I said, this is a family affair. We got Ibraheem Leone in the building today. Ibraheem Leone, actually not in the building. Ibraheem is in Sierra Leone. And but Ibraheem, let me give you a brief intro on this gentleman right here. Ibraheem Leone is a Sierra Leonean American multidisciplinary artist and storyteller who uses mediums like photography, film, and poetry to tell and preserve essential stories. He is the founder of the Tapestry, a project that explores how blockchain can play a role in preserving oral histories, beginning with the oral traditions in his country of origin, Sierra Leone, and extending to locals around the globe. Ibraheem, thank you so much for joining us on Culture Shift. How you living? How you feeling? What is good, family?
Come on. Happy to be here. It's been a long time in the making. Our paths have been intersecting at various points in our individual journeys. I feel like at flashpoints, at important moments in our journeys, and so I think this is a cool moment just to be reconvening and checking in and doing it in a way that other people can get a glimpse into what we're working on. So I'm excited for the conversation. I'm chilling, and I'm also being in Sierra Leone. It's like I'm, I'm sensitive and spoiled when it comes to weather. And I was in California, and it was just a little frigid, and I was like, I don't like this. Um, and being in Sierra Leone now, I feel really blessed and yeah, happy about it.
Yo, man said frigid in Cali, bro. Like, oh my, you want to know where I'm at right now, Ibrahim? Like, I know we connected in Cali, and so we got those roots together, but I am in Michigan. And you want to know what it
Tight.
did? Yeah, you know what it did yesterday? It snowed here in Michigan. And so,
Hell.
yeah, when you showed me that beautiful view off the coast right there, it just like, oh wow, I needed that. That was for my soul right there. And you knew too. You're like, yo, you're gonna appreciate it. You already knew. All right, well, we're gonna get right into the questions here. What sparked your career as an artist?
Ooh wee. It's hard to define the point where I would say it turned into a career, and I still don't even know if like I identify with being like a career artist per se. Although perhaps some metrics would suggest I am. But I would say just my journey with art generally started very young. Like I was always playing around with crayons. I used to like to draw a lot. One of the earliest pieces of art that I have, my mom showed me in recent years, and it was like I drew. a desert and a palm tree in the middle of the desert and some water. It was like an oasis. And I wrote something along the lines of, in every desert there is an oasis, because Allah has given no soul a burden more heavier than it can bear. And so I guess and I must have been like
Spitting. You spit.
7,
Wow.
6, so really young. I was like communicating ideas visually, but also pairing that with words. And so I've been doing that as long as I can remember. And I would say Web3 is really where it turned into a thing that was something that I was compensated for. The intention happened before Web3, but I think Web3 really is what enabled me to, be able to benefit from it financially and also sustain myself in pursuing my artistic and creative pursuits.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. In our intro, we had mentioned the Tapestry and you being the founder of that. Can you speak on that project a little bit um and just speak about the different components of it and what inspired that?
100%. Yeah. So the tapestry is something that I live and breathe, and I've been doing so for the last couple of years. Uh, this is very tied in with the 50 millimeter collective, because in 2021, the 50 millimeter collective was the first Web3 gallery to showcase my work. And at that Meta Masquerade in LA in 2021, towards the end of the year, I displayed a photo from a collection called Homecoming. And so that collection was a collection of photos from Sierra Leone, and I released them with the intention of using the funds to get back to Sierra Leone again and very specifically explore my culture, document it, explore how I can preserve it, and leverage the technology I had already started to explore, which was blockchain, to preserve it. And so it was successful. Folks who were there at the Meta Masquerade ended up collecting, from that collection. Shout out Trish, shout out Domino. Amina hosted me out there. So it was like, that was the kickoff, right? And, made it to Sierra Leone, and then I began to document oral tradition, so uh, poetry. And the reason I did that was because, coming from a West African super oral tradition, we have a beautiful written tradition as well, but a lot of our history, our knowledge, our spirituality is transmitted orally. And due to globalization and just this imbalance in terms of mass importing of culture here and less exporting, so a devaluing of the culture that we have here, some of these oral traditions are dying out. And there's a lot of factors, and we can talk about that at some point. But, that led to a state of urgency for me as someone who is exploring and learning to appreciate my culture, and also making sure that's something that stood the test of time. And so I came and I began documenting traditions in my grandmother's backyard. Started off with like people that I knew, and that evolved. And then I was documenting poems and songs from chiefs, different tribes in Sierra Leone. And yeah, it fueled this mission, which was to, one, document for myself what is important for me to preserve, what are the legacies that are important for me to preserve, be it that of my great grandfather, who I came here and I started to digitize his old correspondences with like the Queen of England and the Sheikh of Al Azhar University in Cairo. So these correspondences, I started digitizing them, whether it was on that level or like my tribe or my father's village in Sierra Leone, just following these threads and documenting them. But beyond that, looking at what the net positive is of a society that's able to retain access to its records, and particularly its oral records. And so it expanded beyond myself, and to a degree, honestly, which I had not anticipated. Because the more that I did it, the more I realized that there were all these threads of connection between different regions, different tribes, different faith practices, ethnic groups, and also locales around the world. And so it very quickly became clear to me that what I was doing was important for me. But in the process of doing that, I wanted to build infrastructure that would enable other people to do the same thing, and lower the barrier of entry for people who maybe are intimidated by the idea of sitting at the foot of their elders and asking them questions. maybe sensitive questions or questions that they're not used to being asked, and like recording that, right? But that's super important. It's really on us to do that. And so the Tapestry is both a collection of song and poems, oral traditions, starting in Sierra Leone, but has since gone on to include 5 other countries around the world that I've traveled to and documented oral traditions in. And beyond it being my collection, me following these interests, these threads, uh, it's also a archival tool that other people will be able to use to preserve stories, but also connect with other people through them. And just the underlying principle, the guiding ethos is the idea that threads of poetry and song, because songs and poems and stories connect us across generations, and they connect us cross culturally, and we're all a little bit more similar than we think. And so us examining those threads of connection, I think, is really important, for the world, as a human race, and making sure that those threads are also accessible to people over the course of time. So that's what I'm working on. It's my collection, but also a tool that other people will be able to use to do what I'm doing as well.
Beautiful. I love the project so much, and just like the um importance of archiving our legacies in our history. And can you speak to a little bit about um, why you think blockchain is, um, in my opinion, right now, I think it's like the best way to preserve our digital stories and culture and things like that. But I would like to know your opinion, and if you could speak to just blockchain and that role of cultural preservation and utilizing it in that way.
Right. Yeah, I think for folks to understand the value in using and leveraging blockchain technology to preserve culture and stories, uh, it's important to understand the value propositions of the blockchain itself. One of them being that the nature of the blockchain is that it's permissionless, and so it doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily required for you to seek permission to use the tooling. It's also that means it's censorship resistant. The idea of a government being able to tamper with your archive and make it less accessible to people because of your political ideology or your beliefs or your ethnicity, your race, etc., is really a problem when it comes to a lot of stories. Like, look at the stories of, for example, Palestinians who are not only being, ethnically cleansed from where they are, but part of it is very much a cultural erasure. Like
Mm-hmm.
literally
Mm-hmm.
having the symbols of who they are swiped and being purported to be, not theirs, right? So there's a real importance in whatever we store in terms of our information and our culture not being able to be easily tampered with. I think another element of the blockchain and why it's very important is that it's transparent. And the nature of archives historically is that they're not. They're usually gate kept off by design, in the sense that your average person cannot access archives, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's in a museum and the gatekeeping is through a fee or through a university. And
Mm-hmm.
to be able to access that information, you have to be studying at that university or be at even at a certain level in your studies to be able to access those materials. Whether it's by class, just in terms of affordability, and then looking also at historically the way culture has been preserved. Oftentimes, you look at like the colonial idea of that and museums. Again, very far removed from the people who should have direct access to that information. So the nature of the blockchain being something that's also transparent, I think, is also relevant to the conversation. Um, it being immutable, if it's important that records are made of something and that they cannot be tampered with after the fact. The nature of the blockchain helps with that. And then the last thing that I'll add for now, and there's, obviously we can talk about this a lot because we're both in this space, and we have a particular approach to our archiving for a reason. The last thing I'll mention for now is just the idea of, information being decentralized and distributed, right? Because that's the real, like the goal of information being accessible, and the storage of that information also being accessible to people around the globe. And that also helps with content persistence. so that if a server was to go down or an entity was to go down or something was to be corrupted, be it a hard drive or a heart, you know, the information, the culture, the archive would still be safe. And so
Mm.
those are some of the reasons why I think blockchain is important to what we do.
Very well said. Thank you for your perspective on that. Um, so you do a lot of traveling to create your work, and it is super inspiring to see you. You had said you've already traveled to 5 different countries, documenting for the Tapestry, and um, traveling can definitely take its toll. And can you speak to that a little bit and how you sustain not only yourself as a human being, but also your creativity and financially how you're able to sustain and travel to all these countries creating this project.
Okay, well, first and foremost, it's God. You know, there's a story of two saints who had an interaction, and these Sufi mystics, you know, there were people who saw the meanings behind the forms and oftentimes interacted on that level. So forget the physical realm, like what's beyond that, right? And so there was this instant when one of these saints had something and the other one requested it from them. And what he said was, "Hat." Well, actually, I'm sorry. Reversing really quickly. Two Sufi mystics, saints, were interacting. One of them gave the other something, and he said, "Khud la lak," which means take, not for you.
Mm.
And the other one, receiving the thing, said, "Give it to me, not from you." Right? And the idea here is that the people, the circumstance are just the outer manifestation of God's sustenance moving around, right?
Mm.
And so I try to move with the intention of connecting with divine purpose. And if that's at the forefront, I'm not really stressed about where and how things will manifest because I'm moving through my why, right? And it's been really interesting to see how that manifests. Like, you know, in my travels, literally just turning around and someone has like apparated out of thin air to give me the exact thing that I need in that moment without me asking. It's not like a one time, a two time, a three-time thing, right? Um, and that is, I think, the core of it is trying my best to move in purpose because then things become easy. It also isn't always easy, right? There's challenges, like you mentioned. How do you sustain yourself physically, mentally, creatively, financially? I would say also what's really important for me has been community. Um, and I underscore the word community. You know, I believe in the power of words. And although some people may be tired of hearing it because the meaning has been sucked out from people who use words without the application of their meaning, community is real, right? And I've been really empowered from the beginning of my journey with strong community. You know, talking about the 50mm collective, the launch of Homecoming, that first batch of 17 collectors, uh, who like Weesh, Kawi, Domino, Trish, Ada. These are the folks who like made it possible in the beginning, just off of a dream. But then consistently, I've had people who supported me through collecting my NFTs, by tapping into systems and ecosystems like Gitcoin, where I'm able to leverage quadratic funding for people to really just vote for me to receive funding with their ETH, uh, has been really impactful. So I would say primarily it's been God, community, family, and the people that I meet along the way. And creatively, there's ebbs and flows. Uh, and one of my teachers talks about, and I love that we can have conversation within this context because you both are people of faith, and so you understand what I'm saying. And I think these are important things to talk about, right?
Absolutely.
So one of my teachers, he talks about creativity as a finite resource to a degree, right? And he talks about the story of Joseph, where when he was imprisoned and the king had a vision, had a dream, and needed it interpreted, and he sent for Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
So the prophet Joseph came and interpreted the dream. And to summarize, what was happening in the dreams was he was seeing like lean cows getting eaten by fat cows, and dry grass being replaced by green grass. And Joseph basically told him what's happening is there's going to be abundance of sustenance in the upcoming 7 years, and then after that there's going to be a famine where people will be very like in need. So what you need to do in that moment when you have abundance is to really store what you have. Like use what you need and store everything away. Store the grain so that when those 7 years of famine come, you're able to replenish yourself. And so my teacher, Dr. Ali, may God preserve him, he talks about using creativity the same way. So when you have those bouts of inspiration,
Mm-hmm.
you're able to document incredible things, when you're able to be inspired by literally just interacting with different elements of the cosmos, those moments, like really take that in. And for people, as you know, people like you and me who are also documentarians at heart, we are lucky in a sense because that's our natural instinct is to like document what we're experiencing. And so we should document that and also in a way store that, right? Like not necessarily feel the need to expend all the creative energy right away. Like we can share some of it, we can build with some of it, but it's okay to go through periods of time where not necessarily feeling as stimulated creatively,
Mm.
and to realize that what we have been doing in those moments of abundance is still relevant in those moments, and we can tap into what we've already documented, the stories we've already been working on. And so that's also been very helpful for me, just like revisiting the things in the archive.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I love that so much, and I really appreciate our conversations that we have, like in the back channels and things of on faith, and just like how that's been able to guide us on our creative paths and journeys and things like that. Can you speak on how, in what ways your faith plays into your creative practice in your process? Um, like for me, for example, as I'm as I'm or going deeper on my faith journey, I'm praying a lot more and praying for strategy and, for God to show me signs and things like that. And that's led me to, honestly starting the Legacy Portrait Project and things like that. And so I'm curious on how that plays into your creative practice and process.
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. I wish I got asked it more. uh, but I would say, one thing is that fundamentally, as a Muslim, I believe that we were created to worship. God says in the Quran, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I didn't create the humankind and the jinn except to worship. So that except is heavy because it means nothing else is really important.
Mm.
But what makes it lighter is the idea that through intentionality, seemingly redundant pieces of action can become worship, right? So, like, if I'm drinking coffee, but I'm like, I want to stay awake to be in service, to grow in my knowledge, to be in service, to help somebody out, to help myself out, to push myself towards my goals, to draw nearer to you, to worship, to remember, that coffee all of a sudden becomes worship, right? So, of course, applying that to a creative practice, which in its essence is a spiritual practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because whatever we create, we're all creations of the creator, right? And it's a blessing to be able to be reflections of his divine reality and be able to fashion things, but honestly we're not doing anything, right? Like we're doing something, but it's only by his will and power that we're able to.
Mm-hmm.
And so thinking about creativity in its essence as a divine practice, I know Not everyone can relate to this, but this is for me what's really important is not necessarily separating the two. And what that means is that in my process, it's important that I ground myself or work to ground myself in the spiritual reality that everything should be in service to Him. Everything should be in alignment with what He would want me to do. Everything should be calling to Him on some level. And one of the practices that another one of my teachers, Peter Gould, he teaches Heart of Design, which is a brilliant course on spirituality and design. Um, he talks about interfacing with God in our creative practices through God's divine names and attributes. So, like in Islam, we have like the 90 names of God, right? Like the beautiful, the giving, the fashioner, the gatherer. So I have been making it a practice as of late to actually call upon his specific names that are relevant to my particular practice. So when it comes to the tapestry, where I'm doing all this gathering and archiving, right? Al Jame, which is the name of God, which is like the gatherer, the one who brings together things together, is important. Al Hafiz, the one who is the custodian of things, right? Who keeps things. Um, for both of us as photographers, Al Musawwir, the one who uh, it's like fashions things, but like if you look at that root word, it's also directly ties to surah, which is like picture. So like if in Arabic, if I was to call you a photographer, I would call you Musawwir, right? Which
Okay.
is like the person taking the photograph. So it's like tying that back to like its most ultimate divine reality. So I would say that's the way that I do it. One is just to continue trying to ground myself in intentions with what I'm doing, whatever the creative project is. Also seeing the lack of separation and trying to remove that barrier that I might put in between creativity and spirituality, because really they're one and the same thing. And lastly, just this practice of trying to intentionally interface with God through His divine names as it relates to what it is that I'm doing creatively at the time.
Mm-hmm. In all of those answers, I kept hearing intentionality and like that being like the foundation. And um, yeah, I love that. Yeah, intentionality in that I just want to acknowledge the amount of like energy and attention that to actually be actionable in being intentional that it takes. Like it take in the space that we're in particular with crypto art, like it's so everything is so fast in this space. So adding that level of intentionality, um, while it may from the outside looking in seem like we have a slower process or something like that, I think um, that may almost like increase the value of the artwork in a sense because of that, because of it being rooted in that intentionality.
Right.
um, yeah, I love that a lot. I have just a couple more questions for you here, Ibrahim. This has been an incredible conversation. Thank you again
Like,
for your time today. What advice would you give to a young creator who is listening to this, feeling inspired by your story, by your words, and is interested in maybe exploring this path that you're on right now? What advice would you give to them?
I would start by reminding gently that you are very uniquely positioned to offer value to the world, because God creates people with individual characteristics and leanings and passions and skill sets and even reference experiences and things that we're not good at and things that we dislike. All this shapes, who we are. And so you're uniquely positioned to offer something to the world. What I believe as a person of faith, though, is that we also are not necessarily burdened with the burden of discovering one's purpose,
Mm,
right? It's like the one who created your purpose, knows your purpose, is guiding you towards your purpose. So the most important thing, this is thematic to what we've been talking, is you're visiting your intentions of how are you trying to align with what the higher power, what God as fashion you should do. So that's just a genuine piece of advice that I would give is like take off some of the pressure, right? Like you don't got to figure it all out. Just set your intentions and move. Seek guidance in what you're doing, and you'll find it. Ask for what you don't feel that you have access to, you'll get it. You know, so that's one. Two, I would stay curious. I would say stay curious, uh, because if we weren't curious, we wouldn't have been here, right? It's like, oh, this new technology, whoa, very cool, kind of confusing. Ah, this is clunky. But still cool and learning and then going deeper and deeper and deeper. Like I don't come from a technical background, but now I'm like nerding out about decentralized file storage and metadata and things that, maybe I understood on a surface level to a degree, but I think curiosity and really setting deep intentions on what I'm doing has led me to be more deeply involved in my work. And so I would say like be curious, and I'd say lastly, extend yourself grace in the process. Um, there's things that will take time to learn, take time to discover. But going back to that first thing where you're removing the burden of like figuring it all out for yourself, just move, and eventually with time, with guidance, like you'll get to where you need to go. And yeah, I think that's it. There's very specific things. Always feel free if you hear this and you have questions about the blockchain and NFTs and archiving and storytelling and preserving stories and oral histories and talking to your elder, like hit me up. Hit me up. Hit Raven up. Raven's a great resource. 50mm Collective is a great resource. But I think like starting on a more deeper level will make the surface level things a lot more easy.
Very well said. Thank you for sharing that perspective. I got two more questions here for you, Ibrahim. We're gonna wrap it up here. What does culture mean to you?
Ooh-wee. I should have a quick answer to this because what I do is basically cultural preservation. And honestly, I don't. Um, I would say culture is probably a fluid thing, depending on who you're talking to. But I can tell you what my culture is, right? Like I can tell you like what my heritage is and why it's important to me. Um, and when I think about what culture is to me, I think about like the mesh that makes society and my people and my tribe and my lineage and the locale where I'm originally from, the locales where I grew up. It's like what makes it what it is, right? And there may be a lot of intangibles in there, but it's reflected through things like language, through things like the arts, through things like tradition. Um, and so those data capture points are important to uplift and preserve, right? Whether it's a song, it's a poem, it's a building, it's a style. I think all these things are culture, and again, relative to different people, it's important. It's important to like hold on to those things, especially when we're talking about cultures like the cultures we come from that have faced such heavy erasure over the course of time. And so, yeah, let's be folks who preserve it. And it's interesting because, this is the culture shift, right? And what I like about that is like the agency there. Because let's talk about Web3 culture. Like, what is that? And um, what I like about it is that I really don't surrender to the idea that like you can define it for me, right? Like you may do a certain thing. There might be a certain meta, like this is how we do things. But if we're talking about tech and decentralization, like I should be able to take the tech and be able to say, well, actually, this is what the culture of my folks who are interacting with this technology look like, and this is what is important to me. Like maybe I'm not as much into the degen side, like, but that's what the culture is to you. Cool, do your thing. But that's not necessarily what is the most important to me when it comes to the culture and space. So yeah, and that allows us, like, having that principle stance when it comes to whatever we deem important allows us to carve out spaces that represent the things that we want, right? And then that becomes the culture. So yeah, shout out the culture shift.
Hey, shout out to Culture Shift. No, shout out to you, Ibraheem. I appreciate you, brother. I got one more question for you here, and then we're going to wrap it up. How do you define legacy, and what do you want your legacy to be?
Mm. Legacy to me is what we leave behind. Uh, I would like for my legacy to be a continuation of the legacies from before, and have the blessing of having great men and women in my lineage, right, who have already have incredible legacies. So preserve those legacies and honor those legacies in the way that I choose to use my life, uh, in the way that I choose to live my life. I think is what's important for my legacy. Um, I could talk about things that I would like to accomplish, but meh, it's. I think that's less important than, like, filling out that divine purpose of so many people had to be born for me to be born, right? And okay, I've been born. What do I have to do for the chain of transmission of goodness to continue? I just want to play a small role in making sure that there's a continuation in the chain and net positive contribution to the world versus negative. I would just hope that my impact that I leave behind is more positive than it is negative. And most importantly, I would pray for a good ending, because I could live my whole life one way and it's a good way or a perceived good way, but then the ending is not. And things are by their endings. And so I would just pray that, however the legacy of my life ends, that it's a good end. And that's it.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Ibraheem, this has been so incredible. Thank you so much again for joining. And thank y'all who tuned in as well and listened via the live stream, especially to everyone who is going to collect this when it hits the blockchain. That is what sets Culture Shift apart, is these episodes are being archived on the blockchain. Not only that, but they are being sold for crypto, and every guest earns a percentage of those sales for being so gracious with their time, energy, and perspective. If you listen to this and are wanting to learn more about crypto art, digital assets, and the blockchain, reach out. Let's connect. There are so many resources, and I would be honored to help you get started on your journey. This is The Culture Shift with Raven50mm. Thank you all again. We will catch y'all on the next episode. Stay hydrated. Stay blessed. Peace.